my bellows that I made with a couch. If you want to see a video about that, check. I'll set up a link later. I'm not going to do that right now. But this is a double acting bellows hooked up on a wooden frame. There are bricks lining the bottom part where the fire goes. And I've been just trying it out to get a feel for how to use a charcoal fire. It's not something I have done a lot of. But I've managed to flatten out the end of a railroad spike, so that's good. And now I want to try something crazy. I have here a steel crucible, and this crucible is intended for melting aluminum. I've used it in the past for that, and I think that by layering these bricks around it, I can basically double this up and use as a foundry. So I'm going to try to do that, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to chat. Welcome. It's good to have you here. I'm going to try doing some foundry work using this forge that I made out of a repurposed leather couch. So I'm going to gather these bricks into a better shape, fill this with charcoal, and see if I can't melt these aluminum cans. And we'll see how many we can feed it. And if you have questions, we'll talk about that too. Meanwhile, I've got one last heat in this piece of steel. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Brace yourself, it's noisy. And let's get that. There, that's better. This is a piece of a lawnmower blade. I used another piece of it to make a Japanese-style plane. I'll probably make a video about that in the not-too-distant future. Right now it's only bits and pieces of footage, and I need to round it out a bit before it's a video. But this is a cut-off piece that was the hole in the center where the lawnmower blade went. And I had that, you know, this scrap piece of steel. I would love to straighten it out and turn it into a good knife, because lawnmower blades are really good steel. I'm going to set that to cool. And now I'm going to rearrange these bricks and try to turn them into a foundry. I am slightly worried about how elevated that is, but hopefully it'll be fine, as long as I don't spill. Now, normally with these sorts of live streams, it's very dependent on questions that pop up. If you have Scott Bragdon, thanks. This looks fun. I appreciate your comment. I think so. It's meditative. I like being out here with the fire, especially without the drumming of a fan. Normally I use a hairdryer for this kind of thing. And that is just so much nicer. Bricks, that's what I was doing. Let's get that. That's better. And then hold on for a sec. Is fun. Got some more bricks. We're going to try to DIY this into a foundry. Don't touch hot bricks, Joseph. There's a specific ratio that bricks are made to. I think it's 2:1:4. And because of that, I mean, everything goes together like Lego. I love that about just regular bricks. We made a kiln ages ago for doing pottery, just out of a bunch of repurposed bricks. And it worked shockingly well. At least it shocked me. I would love to try that experiment again. And I kind of like just having old bricks on hand for that sort of project. If you're new, what we're trying here today is testing out this forge, and right now I'm testing it as a foundry by arranging bricks to hold the heat. Looks more like it. This is just leftover charcoal from my wood stove. Missouri is kind of weird as far as weather goes. There's no mountains between us and Canada, and there's also no mountains between us and Mexico. And so our winters can't decide which one they want to be. We get a couple weeks of Canada where it feels, well, diluted Canada, where it'll drop to 0, occasionally a fair bit below 0. It'll be bitterly cold, typically more humid than I'm used to. And then we'll get a couple weeks of 60 and occasionally even 70-degree weather in the middle of January. We've been using the wood stove on the Canada days, and it's been very helpful. Okay. Way to go, Michelle Radel. Thanks, I appreciate it. Let's get a better view so you can see what's going on. We've got the flames here. We've got the double acting bellows here. Excuse me, not double acting, that is a double lung bellows. Another video for the not too distant future is one talking about this setup and how this type of bellows works. It's a really kind of an ingenious contraption. The bottom part of the bellows goes up, pressing air into the top part. And the top part acts kind of like the bag under your armpit when you play the bagpipes, assuming you do play the bagpipes. And gravity then presses that air into the fire. So I can pump this up and kind of charge it with air, and then wait without pumping, and it'll still go for a few more seconds. About like that. And like that. Look, no hands, it's still pumping. Oh, and it stopped. The amount of control with this thing is really nice. I'm excited to do projects with it. We've got questions here. Donnie actually posted that on my phone. I just got home from work. What are you making? As of right now, I'm melting aluminum cans. I have a whole bunch of soda pop cans that I've been hoarding. And in the past, I've melted those down and used a really simple foundry setup like this to cast them and make things. The simplest thing to make is to just fill up a muffin tin, and that makes ingots. These ones are going to be kind of fun because they're donut shaped. And then you can then use a technique called lost foam casting, where you make something out of styrofoam, bury it in sand, and then pour molten aluminum on it, and the foam gets replaced by aluminum. So you end up with a sculpture made of solid aluminum. I've got one inside. I'll run in and grab it in a minute. I wonder if a lawnmower service place would have a supply of old lawnmower blades for cheap. I have wondered about that recently. I cut up my one lawnmower blade that I had to make that Japanese plane I mentioned, and it worked beautifully, but then I realized that what I really want is a froe, which is a wood carving tool that nobody knows about, that would be so handy for a lot of the projects I want to do. It's used for splitting wood. It's a big L-shaped blade, and it honestly looks like a lawnmower blade sticking out of the side of a handle. So I want another lawnmower blade to make one of those without, cutting it up. Lawnmower blades for making knives, absolutely. Absolutely. I've been stoked by this Japanese plane thing. It was the first time I made a blade that could actually shave hair and do it effectively. And I got these beautiful shavings with the plane, and it was magical. I want to try that again. This thing needs more charcoal. I need to add some. A hungry little beast. There we go. It's better. Okay. It's a weird kind of fire because the air comes from the bottom, not the top. So it's really hard to smother it. If you can't see fire at the top, that's sometimes a good thing because all the heat is being preserved down underneath by the insulation that is the fuel that's eventually making its way down. Kind of an odd thing. Yeah. There we go. Oh, do you see that blue flame? I'm not sure that's coming through on camera. I can see it kind of in the corners there, but that is purple from where I'm standing. I should move these matches before they catch fire. I'm going to rotate that crucible. In the past, I don't recommend anyone ever try this, but in the past, when I was first getting into casting, I was too cheap to buy crucibles, which is the cup that holds the molten metal. And so I thought, what is metal and cup shaped that I could use for that purpose? And I decided soup cans were an appropriate answer. So I found the ones, some cans have a seam on the top and a seam on the bottom, and some only have a seam on the top, like Campbell's soup cans. They're round on the bottom. There's no seam there that's a solder joint that can then fall apart. So I would get those cans and melt aluminum in them and use them to pour. The trouble is they're made of steel, which rusts. And when you're in a fire like this, it rusts extra fast. So it eats through that super thin wall of metal and eventually dumps a whole bunch of liquid, molten, nasty aluminum. And, you know, heaven help you if it's over your feet. But by rotating the can, I was able to squeak by and make sure that the spot that was rusting extra fast was moving. And so far, I still have my feet. I don't recommend anyone ever do that, but I did it, and it kind of sort of worked. That is very hot. It is cool. The flames, if I'm not mistaken, the color of the flame has more to do with the chemistry of the material that you're burning than it does with the temperature. If you're just heating something up and the heat of that object is visible as a glow, that is directly indicating temperature. But the actual color of the flame is a chemistry thing. If I'm not mistaken, the blue is from carbon monoxide burning, which is the flame that comes off of charcoal is partially burned charcoal, which is pure carbon. And if it's partially burned, that means it doesn't have quite enough oxygen. What it wants to turn into is carbon dioxide, 2 oxygens. So if you see a flame over charcoal, it's carbon monoxide burning, which is weird. I never would have thought of carbon monoxide being flammable, but it's actually the fuel that the internal combustion engine was designed to run on initially. It was something called syngas, meaning synthetic gas. There we go. Okay. These cans are starting to get slightly squishy, but they are not molten. Nowhere near close. As soon as the can starts glowing, or the crucible, then I know I'm getting. Grats for pumping that thing. Had a thick tank cap that rusted out. Stepped on a hot piece of spilt aluminum with my bare feet. Ooh! Dude! That's no good! I'm so sorry that happened. There was one time I was casting, I bought a bullet mold for a big, I don't know what caliber muzzle loader rifle, but it made, spheres, which I thought was kind of cool. You could make lead marbles, essentially. And so I'm sitting by the campfire at our home, and I'm, making these lead marbles from scrap lead I've found. And my daughter came along and stepped on a piece of steel that I was using to stir the fire. And that burn was on her feet for a couple of weeks. It was awful. She still talks about it, and it was, what, 8 years ago, and she's only 11? So, I mean, it left an impression, if you'll pardon the pun. Great reminders of the past. Yeah, if only we still designed that way. I'm sure which design you mean, as far as design that way goes. The aluminum cans, or crazy cool stuff? Thick tank cap. Maybe tank cap. I'm getting rid of all my charcoal. I might need to pump a little less fiercely. There we go. Yeah, with the internal combustion engine thing, that fascinates me because we talk about natural gas, and normally, if you have a natural version and then later invent the synthetic one, it's the synthetic one that gets a new name. It's, artificial diamond or whatever. We found the original one first. With gas, we had the synthetic one first, and the natural one came after, which is why we call it natural gas. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Narnia books, they have that gas lamp. And what that thing ran on was essentially the fumes from making charcoal. They would take coal and put it in a sealed container and then heat it slowly. And it would release a whole bunch of carbon monoxide and other, light hydrocarbons, basically the same thing as natural gas. And they would pump this to the street lamps. And you would have gas lines that ran off of this synthetic gas. And when the internal combustion engine was first developed, it was designed to run on that. So what's crazy about that is you can still run an internal combustion engine off of the fumes from charcoal or wood. You can run it on smoke. And during World War II, when gas was being rationed aggressively in Europe, there were about 300,000 internal combustion cars and trucks that were converted by, ingenious people to have what looked like a boiler on the back that you would throw wood chips and, an old cotton sheet and the newspaper and whatever source of fuel you could find. And you'd put that in that tank, set a small fire under that one, and the gas that came off of that would run the engine. And so you could literally use wood to fuel your car. Horribly inefficient. I mean, you're getting 10 miles to the tank at that point, but it's the difference between having a car and not having a car. Wildly cool. Michelle Radel, tuck the ties from the sweatshirt into your shirt so they don't catch fire. That's a good idea. I appreciate that. An old welding gas tank cap. Old school efficient use of waste. Yeah. It's crazy. One of the things that I'm fascinated by is old crafts. And, I've read a lot of old books about blacksmithing, and one of the things that I find fascinating is the single biggest difference I can see between modern blacksmithing and blacksmithing back in the day is how cheap iron is. When smiths back in the day were making something like a knife, they would go to extreme lengths to reduce the amount of material they were using in that tool. So the tangs are really thin, and there's no material except for where it needs to be. And that's because iron was wildly expensive because it was hard to make. Whereas now, the blacksmithing is basically a scrap metal hobby. It's something that you go to the dumpster, you find old leaf springs, old disc brakes, just rebar, and you're able to have an unlimited supply of iron. And so you can make things bigger, chunkier, uglier, stronger. And the steel quality is better, objectively, so you don't need to do all that folding that, famous old swords had. It's a really interesting difference. Okay. Too many sparks are flying. I'm going to add some flame. Here we go. There we go. As a kid, watched Mr. Teslonian convert a truck to syngas with a home-built distiller. That is so cool. That was so cool. I would love to see that. I'd love to try that someday. I've had this idea. I would love to see a gasifier, a machine that's designed to produce that gas is called a gasifier. I would love to have one that was kind of bulletproof and idiot-proof, me-proof, and just have it for storage. You know, a lot of people have home generators, but fundamentally, gas is something you can only store so much of, and it's expensive. But if you were able to use leaves, newspapers, wood chips, that would be really, really cool. Steve X Racer, welcome. You're here. Excellent. We're having a party. We're trying out this new bellows and forge setup that I have. The forge is made out of wood, except for the box that holds the fire. That's made out of brick and dirt. And right now, I have put up a bunch of extra bricks around this so that we can hopefully heat up a crucible full of aluminum cans, melt them, and turn them into... Glad I caught your stream. Definitely pop around more. Just can't stop smiling around here. Oh, good. That's awesome. I'm glad you're smiling. Thanks, man. Excellent. Interesting. I can't but help but think that there should be some molten aluminum at the bottom of that thing. It's been heating up for quite some time. So I'm going to try to press it down and see what happens. Ooh, that's interesting. Hitting the first bit of molten aluminum is the hard part, in my opinion, because that's where it'll either form a puddle or it won't. And if it forms a puddle, that puddle helps to melt all the rest of it a lot faster. Not quite there. We're getting there. I think this is a workable concept. I am also thinking I underestimated how much charcoal I would need. Fortunately, there's a big bag of lump charcoal in the back of my car, so I might try this again tomorrow and get it to work. Any other thoughts? I love seeing these comments. You guys are great. Thank you for stopping in and watching. What have we here? Ow, that hurt. Not a lot. There we go. There we go. Here we go. Oh, that sound. It sounds like a rocket. Cool thing about this this handle that I'm using to pump the bellows, it's hooked up to the bottom of the bellows by a cord over there, and the middle of it is just suspended, which means I can move it over to this side of the forge, and it works just as well as if it's over on this side. This is just where it's ergonomic. It's comfortable over there. But it's also adjustable because there's nothing drilled into it in the middle point, so I can actually slide it back and change the mechanical advantage if I want to, or just slide it back this way so that I change it the other direction. More people should do this. It's like barbecuing, except instead of meat, you get tools and toys. Random thought off the top of my head. You may be able to preheat the bellows air with a single tube heat exchanger running through the forge. Now that's an interesting idea. I wonder if it would heat it enough that it would damage the inside of the forge. One thing I wonder about, you know, the airstream is fairly continuous. It's coming through the top part of the bellows, right, going into the fire. But the gap between it and the fire is not huge. And my valves aren't perfect. Occasionally, when I pump this thing, it sucks air in the opposite direction, which would be bad because this air is full of fire, and that bellows is made out of wood and, you know, synthetic leather. So, I can't imagine that would be a good. That reminds me of how an old Chinese water lifter works. This thing? I would love to hear more about that. Is that like I've seen the chain drive Chinese water lifters. I've seen them in illustrations, and I can't imagine that they were common. That sounds so incredibly complicated to make. But then again, barrels were common, and that is a watertight vessel made out of a bunch of wood seams that are carved by eye. That blows my mind. Some things I think should be impossible were common in history, and other things that I think should have been easy never happened. Like mechanical spinning didn't happen until super late. Ow! Stop that. If you're not losing your arm hair, are you really having fun? Yeah, the stick on the rope. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, in ancient Egypt, what do they call that? In Egypt, they call it a shaduf, where it's a counterweight that helps you to lift water up using basically just one of these. That is cool stuff. Moving water is one of those jobs that was horrible until we invented modern power. Yes, that. Okay, good. We're on the same page. Shaduf. Cool stuff. I'm running low on fuel. How do I do that? Well, I do have a bucket of bark. Not quite the same as charcoal briquette, but it's going to do for now. Now, there we go. That will do. Sunday barbecues, nah, Sunday blacksmithing. Yeah. Yeah, started to get worried about heat restraints of internals. If the output valve could be cleaned up to have an exchanger after the bellow, or you could play around with the materials that the thing is made of. Another way that you could cheat is using something like rotary bellows weren't a thing for pretty much all of history, but nowadays we have the option to use a spinning fan. And that fan could very easily be made of metal. It could basically be the same thing as like a turbocharger in a car. And then, I mean, you could preheat that air. That wouldn't be a problem. The Egypt shaduf is what your stick looks like, yeah. So many uses for the simple machine of a lever. Yes! It's kind of amazing. I've been addicted recently on Pinterest to these short, basically GIFs of mechanical motions. Like different types of lever, different types of linkages, different types of gear arrangements, weird shaped gears. A zoomed in version of how a particular mechanical thing works, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I love that stuff. Yeah, you're right, 100%. Steve X Racer, you basically have a first-class lever, stick on a rope, driving a second-class lever. I don't remember which version, which type each class is, but I do know that I do understand the different types, like the one with the pivot on the end versus the one with the pivot with the load in the middle. I saw this really interesting video by the engineer guy where he talked about how a soda can works when you do the pull tab. Initially, it's the middle of the tab where the rivet is that gets lifted, and then that breaks the seal, which then allows the front part of the front part of that lever to press down, with the rivet suddenly becoming the pivot point. Initially, the pivot point is what's being moved up, the rivet, and then the rivet becomes the pivot point. So it changes which class of lever it is as you're popping open a soda. That is just wildly cool. People are so clever. I aspire to that level of genius. Making soda pop cans. That's awesome. The other project I've been working on recently is the carding cloth. I made a couple videos about that recently. I'm trying to make a carding drum, and the design constraints I'm working with are, A, I need to be able to design it, so it needs to be simple. But the things that I care about are cost and simplicity. And what I'm looking for are no specialist parts. If it uses parts that are not 3D printed, I want them to be very easy to access and cheap and standardized and kind of idiot-proof. That's important to me, to make it replicatable. I've been playing around with this idea of using small nails embedded in laser cut slats to make the carding cloth work, to make a carding cloth. And it's not working yet, but I think the idea has promise. The carding cloth one has been such a frustrating one because it's very simple, but it's made me ask so many questions. I want to know what they were using right at the beginning. I found some really old patents. I can't remember the name of the inventor off the top of my head, who invented these rolling carding drums for preparing the fiber for the Arkwright's mill. But it referenced needle sticks as being what was going around the outside. And that sounds an awful lot like what I'm trying to make with the laser cut wood slats with a bunch of little holes that I then put a bunch of tiny little finishing nails in, and then those line up to make the carding cloth. So I think that's how they did it, but I would need to see pictures or get access to a museum or something to be able to confirm that. It's a funny one. It's so fundamental. How close are we to melting this aluminum? Ooh, close. Actually, very close. Ooh, that's very good. It's getting gooey. That's really good. Oh, yes, yes. Haha, we might be getting there. As soon as it gets up to temperature, it just starts swallowing aluminum cans, and you keep putting them in until you run out of them. Eli Whitney did a version during the industrial era, if I understand what a carding cloth is. Did he really? Interesting. Eli Whitney, fascinating human being, made standardized parts for rifles, gets credited with inventing standardized parts. Kind of. They had standardized parts before that. Chainmail is an example of that, where each ring is essentially replaceable with another ring. But mechanically complicated ones like that, it's a huge achievement. In ancient China, they had crossbows. And these crossbows had a bronze trigger mechanism. And they have found reportedly, I mean, this is filtered through Chinese archaeologists who are trying to make China look good. But they found pins, like the pivot pin on one of these crossbows can be interchanged with one that was found hundreds of miles away from the first, which suggests that they were working off of standardized plans and that they had some mass production and standardized parts. If that's true, that's wild, and I assume it is. That sounds specific and replicatable. I don't think people would make that up. As far as the carding cloth goes, Eli Whitney, I don't know if he did carding cloth. He's famous for the cotton gin, which pulls the seeds out of cotton. It's an initial step needed to make cotton into a useful tool. My right arm is getting tired. There we go. I think we need more fuel again. More fuel. Like I said, I can't stop smiling. He made a cotton gin for cleaning cotton. Yeah, cotton gin's a weird one. I tried making one. I ran into similar problems as with the carding drum because I didn't know how to get a rotating thing to stick onto a cheap, easy to reproduce shaft. And so I tried that threaded rod trick with the nuts to try to lock it in place. Didn't work. But I have the files, and if I just swap out the set screws from the new design, with that problem solved, I think I can get that thing to work. The way it works is you have essentially a bunch of little tiny buzzsaw blades that have hooks on them. So it's the spinning disc with a bunch of hooks. And each of these passes through a thin slot that's a little bit wider, but not by much, than the blade. And they're not sharp blades. I'm just calling them blades because they look like saw blades to me. And as they go through, they hook onto a little bit of cotton fiber and pull it through. But the slot that the fiber is going through is too small for the seeds. And so you pull away all the fiber and you're left with seeds falling out the back. Super clever. Before that, people would do it by hand. With long staple cotton, you can use rollers, basically like a pasta roller, to separate the seeds. But you can't do that with the short staple cotton. And so it was a tedious job where people were literally picking it out with their fingers. And Eli Whitney, if I remember correctly, he was trying to reduce the need for slavery in the South. He thought, right now they need a whole bunch of enslaved people to process the cotton. If I could make that more efficient, then we wouldn't have so many enslaved people. Turned out, though, as soon as he solved that bottleneck and made it so that 1 or 2 enslaved people could process a whole bunch of cotton, suddenly the profit margin for cotton went up, and therefore the demand for slavery in the South went massively up, not down. Similar thing happened around the same time with Gatling guns. There was a guy who, Mr. Gatling, I think his last name's Gatling, invented a gun trying to reduce how many people would be needed to shoot all the bullets on the battlefield. If one person can shoot 10,000 bullets, he can replace all the other people who used to be shooting the 10,000 bullets. You'll have fewer people on the battlefield, fewer people get killed. Didn't quite work that way. And then we ended up with World War I to test that idea. It didn't work. Interesting. Misunderstood carding cloth. Yeah, it's super specialized. It's not a common thing that we think about. It's basically dog brushes. It's a springy, thick cloth with a bunch of spring steel teeth embedded in it, exactly like a dog fur brush, combing brush. Oh, for Pete's sake, come on, I need some more fuel. Again. We're going to move this around a little bit. Excusez-moi. There we go. Now I can use my left hand and still be in the frame. That'll be good. Now. Smoke in my eyes. I want to thank you for being here. We are testing out this forge setup, trying to melt some aluminum cans. So far, none have officially melted, but I think we're going to get there. What do you guys do on the weekends? Sit around melting aluminum cans? Good times. Did you know that a blowtorch would silicon nubs on a circular silicone base plate be strong enough to do the same thing as a carding cloth? Silicone nubs on a circular silicone base plate. That's interesting. I think you're thinking of casting it. That would be really interesting. I don't think so. I mean, I theoretically, I think it could work. There's a device from India that uses rollers to do essentially the same thing as carding cloth, but they're only working with cotton, which has a super short fiber length. Wool has a length anywhere from about there to about there. It's quite long. But cotton tends to be around there to there. Super tiny. So you just set rollers to a preset distance about like that, shove a mass of cotton through, and then stretch it a whole bunch of times, and you end up getting all of them pulled into the right way. Rake Tech, a shame with corpus groups only finding greed. How much humanity could have been helped in history. It's odd. I think there's fundamentally three ways to change the world. The three ways are using law, using culture, and using technology. Technology changes what is possible and how much effort it takes for something to happen. With a stone axe, I now have the capacity to chop down a tree. With an iron axe, I now have the capacity to do that faster and cheaper and easier. And so, that just tells us what's possible. Then you have things, the law determines what is permitted. You can tax things, you can say that's not allowed, you can direct force of the state to try to stop bad guys from doing bad things and to try to encourage some things. It says what is permitted. And then culture says what is desired. And in order for you to desire something, you have to be aware that it exists, and then there's all kinds of social reasons why we want what we want. And corporations are weird because they live in the space between culture and technology, mostly. There's a bunch of funny things, like alcohol is terrible in a lot of ways. The whole Prohibition movement had a lot of things going for it. You looked at broken families and drunks and the economic damage to our society, and it's a mind-altering substance. As soon as you introduce cars into the mix, alcohol becomes even more dangerous. I mean, it'd be kind of nice if we could just get rid of it, even though it's socially very desired. Culturally, that one's not going away. And in terms of technology, making alcohol is wildly easy. You just let a tank of, you soak bread in water and let it go bad, and it's going to turn into alcohol. It's almost impossible to stop someone from being able to do it. So you can't stop it. And we discovered that during the Prohibition era. If the desire is strong enough and if the technology is easy enough, cheap enough, then you cannot stop it. There's no such thing as regulation for it anymore. And we have similar things going on now with things like 3D printed weapons, where, you can tell me I can't, but you can't stop me from doing it, and the materials are easily accessible. We think of 3D printers as being exotic and difficult right now, but essentially it's a hot glue gun with stepper motors. You have stepper motors in your CD player. Everybody has stepper motors. They're not hard. Hooked up to an extremely tiny, very dumb little computer called a microcontroller, which you have in everything, all the way down to like a smart fridge has one, a really smart one. So I find it interesting. The corporations, I don't think we can ever blame them because it's not really them. They are symptoms, not causes, pretty much ever. The exception is with things like advertising, because advertising is a conscious decision to try to push culture in a particular direction. You are trying to convince people that they want something, which means adjusting culture to change what is desired. And there's a similar gross thing that happens with lobbying, where a corporation, based on its interests, starts pushing to change law, to change what is permitted. I think both of those things are gross. Technology is odd because it's value neutral in a lot of ways. It's just the ability to do something. It doesn't mean that you should do that. It just means that you can't. And then you have to decide what to do with that information, that raw power. Just like a gun. You could use it well, you could use it really badly. Depends. Depends a lot. So I find that really interesting. That was a bit of a rant. I love that stuff. Yeah, 3D printing the structure, I've been trying that. There's ideas that are kind of promising, and I think for an individual user, they could totally work. I might release the files with that idea in mind. But if you want, I wanted to turn it into something reliable enough that it could be a product. I was selling, fiber arts tools, and reliability is important, not least so that I could get good reviews on Etsy. And I wanted it to work well and not break down after a few months. I wanted it to be worth what the person was paying for it. And so 3D printed teeth that were breaking off in my tests just weren't good enough, even though it kind of sort of worked. Good old kvass. I love kvass. Kvass is great. I have a buddy who we were both Latter-day Saint missionaries. I served my mission in Holland and Belgium, and he served his in Russia. He has wild stories. He got beat up a lot. Met a lot of really interesting people, but he got a case of kvass and introduced me to that a little while ago. You can find wild yeast anywhere, for that matter. Yeah. I mean, you can't stop that one. What are you going to do? Exterminate all the yeast that is in all the soil and on the skin of all the fruit? You know grapes, how they have that kind of white film on them? As a kid, I always assumed that was some kind of chemical spray or whatever. It's yeast. Same thing with plums. The surface of the plum has yeast. And I don't know if this is scientifically true, but the wisdom of the brewers, they say that the type of yeast that is on the surface of the fruit or grain you are trying to turn into alcohol is the ideal one to use for that particular feedstock. So, you know, good grape yeast comes on grapes. Pineberry. Great wisdom, Raytech. Thanks. I appreciate that. Hope you got something good out of it. How far from the bill does Velcro fit? I don't know. Velcro typically has plastic teeth, and so I think there's a limit to how long you can make them before they become just too floppy. And I don't know if they could get long enough to do the job, but I'd be interested to try it. That sounds fascinating. Pineberry 212. So an idea, I can speak English. An idea just popped in my mind for a carding cloth. Can't you stack a bunch of discs that are kind of saw blade shaped? Yes! I have thought about this. I thought you could laser cut them. The question is, what do you make them out of? I think you could probably get away with doing that in plastic. I think you could 3D print them as well. Assembling something like that would be kind of tedious, but if it worked, right? Especially for making one at home. And it's not like I haven't been doing tedious. I put in, by my count, 2,000 nails into the drum carder prototype that I just made. I did get some child labor for that. My kids saw what I was doing at the dinner table and thought it looked really fun, so they joined me and made a bunch of needle sticks. And my daughter was hot gluing them on the back to make sure all the nail heads stayed where they belonged. That was actually a really fun time. But in theory, yeah, the disc thing, I would love to try that. It would need spacers, but it might work better, yeah. If you 3D printed them, you could have the spacers pre-built with the discs. So just make one part thicker than the other part. Wow, I got a lot of smoke in my eyes. There's a book I've been meaning to read about cremation and the whole death industry called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, which I just think is a very funny image. Not something you think about typically. Let's see if this is working better. Yep, that cam is going. Woo! And I just lost my finger here. Good stuff. The cans are starting to condense and kind of squish. I haven't seen any molten at the bottom, but that would be interesting. Pineberry 212. I was thinking 3D printing, but you could use 20 gauge plate or 1/8 inch veneer. Dan's backcountry. Hey, what's cooking, Doc? So I've got here, I'll show you. We've got a forge setup. I've got a bellows. This was made using plywood and some laminate flooring to make it look pretty. And then the leather came from a couch that, you know, was sacrificed for this purpose. And now what I'm trying to do is use the forge to melt aluminum cans. So I've arranged bricks to keep the heat in. I've filled it with charcoal many, many times. And now I am pumping it to see if I can use this as a foundry setup as well. It's taken a while, but it does seem like it's going to work. Good stuff. Steve X Racer, 3D print a disc with nail holders around the perimeter. The nails are inserted from the center and they point out at tangential angles. Stack multiple discs together to get a drum. Yes, yes, this is the idea. You know, let's do a quick detour. This fire will watch itself for a minute. Come with me. Whee! So, I'll go ahead and show you my prototype. This is what I'm thinking. These are the needle sticks. They are laser cut from 5mm plywood. They screw into these end caps that are 3D printed. And then I've got the whole tension mechanism, like I showed in that video from the other week, here. That actually works surprisingly well. My tests the other day to see if this actually combed wool didn't do great. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I think that my needles are actually too close together so that they interfere a little too much when they get to here. Anyway, I'm going to have to figure out the deets for that one. I haven't gotten there. I do feel like I am getting there. And that feels good. Let's see here. Looks good. Thanks. Dan's Back Country. Let's see here. Might talk to you later about setting some custom order stuff together, but I don't want to detail your live feed. I appreciate that. Do you make custom blades? You know, I haven't yet. I am more of what you call a hobby smith. I took one professional order as a smith ever. I had a teacher who wanted a replica made of her family's brand. She was from a ranching family and had this family heirloom, and they wanted a copy, so I made a copy. Yeah. And for a short time, I made steel roses on Etsy, but that was short-lived. Kind of hard to monetize that one. Steve X Racer looks good. Thanks. I'm excited about that prototype. It's a scalable idea. One thing that I want to do differently with the next one is, right now the teeth are both the same length and they're both angled this way, and so that means this one's taller than this one. And so I had an idea for how to shimmy those so that they both came to the same circular distance from the center. And I'm kind of excited to see if it works in practice. Yeah. I'm seeing aluminum start to settle where it belongs. I think we'd finally be getting there, ladies and gentlemen. Ow. Almost every time I get obnoxious cuts on my hands, I get them from wood. The other day, I split a log, a short one, for the family fire, and as I was trying to pull it apart, got a bunch of splinters in my hand. One of them got infected. Minor, but it's funny to me. I do a lot of stuff with fire and a lot of stuff with metal, and it's the wood that ends up biting me. Leather gloves are your friend. Dan's Backcountry. I always carry a pair when I do my thing. Yes. I had a friend who introduced me to this really fun clip that he had on his belt for holding the gloves. Genius. Absolutely genius. Of course, I would remember grabbing it and bringing it with me when planning. That is what is lacking there, not equipment. Have the tool, use the tool. Preserve the hands. Pineberry 212. Oof, I got a splinter in my thumbnail last week. I'm still pulling splinters out. Ain't fun. You have my sympathy. I appreciate that. Thank you. I need a longer stir stick for this molten metal, I think. Because my fingers... loving that. That's melting. We're getting there. It is doing the thing. Wow, it's doing the thing. On purpose. Wow. First try. Dan's Backcountry. Yes, I have a clip on my side that I carry them on as well. Anytime I'm chopping wood or doing anything with a campfire, I use them when I'm in remote places. You need to be careful. Absolutely. There's this, I don't know if you could call it a meme, like a, you know, one of those workplace posters, like the classic propaganda style image from World War I and World War II. But I guess this was around somebody's machine shop. And it was a picture in that same style of a guy holding up his hands and saying, your 10 best tools, no extras in stock. That leaves an impression. Kind of amazing. They really are. 10 best tools. Funny thing about that, the word manufacturing, two Latin words. Manus, hand, and then factoring, to like fabricate, or face. That's the word for to make. So it is to make by hand. Handmade, manufacture. But also factory, making place. Steve's X-Racer, LOL. Dan's Backcountry, we had something like that on one of the submarines I was stationed on. Oh, like the poster? That's crazy. Yeah, I'm running low on fuel again. One thing I am curious about is how forests are bigger now than they were back when we used fuel, wood as our primary fuel for heating our homes and doing industry and all that. I mean, we burned down Sherwood Forest to make the industrial age happen at the very beginning. Why are all of us YouTubers a bunch of college nerds? Yes, 100%. We should be. Being a nerd, you know, I don't love everything John Green says, but he has this fantastic quote about being a nerd. I love it. Where being a nerd basically just means you have permission to get excited about stuff. CWU grad here, awesome. Better conservation. Yeah. Nowadays we have bigger forests, and a lot of that is due, I think, to us using fossil fuels. We shifted a lot of the burden that was formerly carried by wood is no longer carried by wood, and there's a lot of wood management stuff that we just don't do anymore, like coppicing, where you repeatedly harvest the same woodland and get the trees to produce more wood on purpose. We don't do that. A coppice wood is sometimes called a copse. You'll see that still in, you know, novels, but people don't understand what it means. They just think it means a small woodland. Yes, but a small managed wood farm, essentially. I really wonder about a lot of those skills they used to have back in the day to conserve fuel, to do blacksmithing with as little fuel as possible. I don't know how they did that. To heat your home with as little fuel as possible. I think it would be neat to learn that stuff a little. Because I suspect that if we ever ran out of the fossil fuels, we would burn down all the forests very, very fast. Because we wouldn't know how to use them efficiently at all for basic needs. More fire equals better fire. Things I think about. There are, speaking as someone who does my YouTube channel in primarily the remote wilderness, we have laws that require replanting and sustainable practices. Nice. Nice. There is thought to that, and that is a good thing. Steve X, there are some issues though. Yeah, implementation, knowledge, there's a few of them. Steve X Racer, battery-powered cars are the worst idea. Battery was has a very low store of energy compared to petrol. I think there's something to be said for that. So you have to consider the embodied energy of whatever it is that's being made, right? So the energy it took to make it, the resources that went into it, whether or not those are environmentally friendly, lithium from the deserts in South America, all that stuff goes into that. But I think we're missing something huge with electric cars. And the two things are, one, regenerative braking. You can't do that with gasoline. And two, home solar. So our energy grid is huge, it's complicated, it's amazing, it is a gift, it is incredible, one of the most complicated machines that's ever been made, one of the biggest machines that's ever been made. But I hate it. I hate it because I am dependent on a life support system connected to generators that are hundreds of miles away sometimes. And my life depends on that generator functioning and all the fiddly bits in between here and there working properly. With electric cars, that is, your electric car is basically a giant battery connected to a very good motor on wheels. That battery is a home electric storage battery every time you're not driving and it's just parked in your driveway. So my thought is, I think we're looking at electric cars wrong, where if you, and the big problem with solar, right, is needing a battery to store the energy for when you actually need it. Like when you come home from work and the sun goes down, that's the time when you want to microwave your Hot Pocket and watch some TV, and you actually need the electric lights. So I think electric cars fitting into the role of a home solar energy system could make us way less dependent on the energy grid in general, which means suddenly you don't need power substations, and you don't need to consider how much waste is happening in the transmission. We've gotten good at minimizing it, but you're still, I mean, if you're passing water through a really, really long aqueduct, a bunch of it's going to evaporate. That's just how it works. Same thing with electricity over a long distance. So I wonder about that. Focus on replanting valuable timber and don't replace timber that's not seen as valuable. Yeah, I mean, that's gardening in a nutshell, right? Weeds are the plants you don't want. You skew things toward what you think is useful. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but I do think we need to be careful not to miss the value of things we might not see value in initially. Whether that's ecological value or future medicines or, I don't know. I think there's value in recognizing our ignorance. That's where a lot of that comes from. Instead of replacing the cottonwood trees they clear as byproduct, they'll replant cedar, spruce, and hemlock. Yeah, I could see that. Part of that's probably because cottonwood grows like a weed and sucks up water like crazy. So you'll have more forests that are more akin to a field of corn than a true forest. Kinda? Yeah, farmed. Pineberry 212. I work at a company called Taurus that's working on better solar support and management and flywheels. It's cool to see how it all will work. Yeah, flywheels are cool. Mechanical batteries. A lot of cool things there. Oh, for Pete's sake. I let it cool down too much by letting the fuel disappear from where I needed it. Speaking of batteries, I can make that connection. Okay. Ooh, we have charcoal. That's good. There we go. Oh, that smells funny. The flywheel idea reminds me of the gravity battery. I think gravity batteries would be so cool. I have a hill that I live on, and because I have a hill, I wonder about using pumped water for storage. My wife liked the idea of having a pond up close to the house, and for good reason. We have little kids. Drowning hazards are a thing I need to think about. But also mosquitoes. But the idea of just using water flowing down the hill to store energy, to use it when I need it, is a really cool idea. There's some elegance to it. Cottonwoods. They also grow them too close together, and native forest and replanted forest look very different. They can. If you ever go through a paper plantation, they look so different. just a block of the same tree, planted so dense that it's obvious it's just trying to maximize volume. It's a really weird look. Those kind of monofilters are great for all the plants and animals. Yeah, crazy. If you spend as much time in the wilderness as I do, you can see the difference, for sure. That's cool. That's cool. It's cool that you can see that. That's a beautiful thing. I took an art class when I was a teenager, and one of the things I loved the most about it was not, learning to do some more art. The thing I loved the most about it was learning to see things that I couldn't see before. I saw shading and contrast better, and I just noticed things that were beautiful more. And, I don't do art anymore, but I still do that. I can see. And spending that time in the wilderness, that's a cool thing. Good on you, man. Zach Gravity. I know there's already some methods of producing liquid fuels. Yes! Alcohol is a fuel. You can do it badly or you can do it well. I had this idea for a business. If you want to steal this, go ahead and steal it. I'm not going to get to it. But when I was doing my undergrad degree, I was in Idaho, in a pretty rural area, and they had a really bad barley harvest. They grow a lot of the barley that's used by Budweiser and other beer companies there. And they had a bad barley harvest where rained at inopportune times, the barley sprouted on the vine, it ended up being completely ruined. They lost billions of dollars worth of barley. And I look at that and think, man, wouldn't it be neat if there was a business that made ethanol as a fuel? And that business kind of eked along and just survived most years. Just barely enough revenue to keep things going, but with massive capacity to ramp up production if an opportunity opened up. And then if that business was just kind of lurking and then was able to pay farmers something just over the cost of harvesting the crop so that they are able to pay their guys and get at least something for it rather than having it literally go to waste in the field when a bad year hits or when there's an oversupply or when there's a bunch of, a grain bin that goes bad. Let's say that somebody builds a grain bin and then, the concrete goes bad and water gets in. Can't use it for anything. It's pig feed, which is just a wildly cool thing. I think there's potential for a business like that. And just setting yourself up next to like a canning factory where there's, all the apple cores and pits and rinds and, the extra bits that you can turn into alcohol. I think that would be cool. Dan's Backcountry. You can use a washer machine motor to create a DC power generator. Yes. That is so cool. I would love to do that. Look at my comment above the last one you read. You have an earlier one. Gravity. Scrolling up. This has me wondering if there might be a way to make a synthetic wood substitute of some kind and produce it from captured atmospheric carbon. I mean, you can. There's a couple ways to do that. I think the easiest one is just grow trees and plants and other things. If I understand correctly, fiberglass is an invention that was originally based off of wood. Fibers bonded together in this substrate. Come on, man. Are you going to melt or what? Are these cans going to do the thing? They might. I need a longer stick. I found a stick. Haha. As far as synthetic wood and charcoal briquettes go, I think there's a lot of potential there with like making briquettes from grass. So if you get grass and you let it decompose just a tiny little bit and then press it under very high pressure, you can make briquettes out of it and then turn those into charcoal and use them as a fuel. I think there's a lot of opportunity for things like that. Absolutely. RakeTech, very cheap 3-phase rectifier on Amazon, high amps. What does that mean? That's electricity speak. I don't speak that yet. I want to. Electricity intimidates me. That's why I've done mostly mechanical stuff up to this point. I'd really like to do that more. I have the good fortune of living in a part of the United States that does not have a building code. And so there are a lot of things I can get away with here that many people could not, legally speaking, do. And one of those would be taking half of my house off grid and leaving the other half grid tied, so I could get the best of both worlds. And so I've got, this shed over here and this carport that I'm on, and right behind me, those crates are full of solar panels that I have yet to put on the roof because that project intimidates me a little bit. But I would love to, learn what it takes to do that safely and to do it well. Anyway, that's a project for another time. Okay, what do we got here? Got wood. That's good. We're running low on fuel again. I forget how hungry this stuff is. I wonder if you could liquefy wood gas. Man, that would be fascinating. I bet you could. I think, isn't liquid natural gas a thing? Might be one of those things that's super specialized, like trying to make your own liquid nitrogen. I remember Grant Thompson, the King of Random, had a setup in his house where he was making, liquid nitrogen just from the nitrogen in the air. Had a whole bunch of different steps, but it was doable. He did do it in his house. Pineberry 212, retting for the material? Yeah. The word retting literally is just the Dutch word for rotting. And so that's all it is. It's just rotting. But when it's done deliberately, we call it retting, thanks to the flax trade. Washing machine motor for DC Gen. Yeah. I have a treadmill motor that I took apart. I saw a video by Jeremy Fielding years ago where he made a rowing machine generator for his kids to play video games out of a big D motor. And I love that idea. I have one of those motors sitting around. I've been hoarding, electronic components, taking things apart from microwaves and such. But it's just the knowledge component that's been missing. So if you have good recommendations for how to go about that and not get myself killed, I would love to hear that. Are you going to do a 12-volt solar system or 24-volt? I'm leaning toward a higher voltage. My understanding there is that it's better. I'm not sure why. But the stuff I've gleaned from the online forums tends to say that the higher number is better. I think it'll depend mostly on how I can do it the cheapest. I wondered about using a bunch of tool batteries, the ones that clip in like a DeWalt drill or a Makita drill. I find those used sometimes, and if I could find a system that was intelligent enough to balance the amount of power that's getting from every battery and do so safely, and just have a wall that is a rack of those batteries and run the whole system that way, I would love to do that, so I could just swap them in and out as needed. I think that would be cool. RakeTech, U-strut from Building Supply Store makes a heavy but sturdy frame, weld or nutted together. That's great for the actual frame putting the panels up. Absolutely. Yes, liquefied natural gas is normal, but makes me wonder why they don't do that for wood gas when they make briquettes. Do they not? Interesting. Interesting. A lot of the briquette makers, I looked into buying one years ago, and it was really clever because it routed the gas out and then under it so that it could have a steady flame that then kept it going. So it was essentially self-sustaining, using that wood gas to make the flame needed to run it. Oh, for Pete's sake, why are you not getting warmer? Then I miss Grant. Looked him up since I can remember with his HHO gen. Plant pot furnace, yes, that one changed my life. That's basically what I'm trying to replicate here. Arc furnace, Scariac water variac, and so many other things from him. On solar wire, might be cheaper than continued. You actually have a friend, Pineberry 212, who's doing the DeWalt batteries thing for an electric bike project. It got stolen, unfortunately. That's terrible. I remember when I was a kid, I had a bike that I thought was a pretty good bike, but I loved that it was a little rusty and a little ugly because that was my bike lock. My bike lock was the fact that it was rusty, and it made me think that in the future I would want to put dents and rust and duct tape on my bike, even if it didn't need them, just so there would be no status gained by stealing my bike. RakeTech continued. Individual inverters for every couple panels. Nice. Are those MPPT controllers that I hear about, where there's those charge controllers for each couple of panels? I've been trying to avoid that because that means buying more parts, but I'm still collecting research to figure out exactly what I need so I can do it properly the first time, hopefully. I think I might need to give up on this for the day. The last time I did casting, I just dug a hole in the ground and stuck a hairdryer to it, and I think that might be my default method for the near future until I get a propane furnace worked out for casting. Confirmed that this works good, can get up to high temperatures, and works great for the forging side. And it's quiet, and I love that. For the casting side, I'm not sure that I could call this a success. I'm not sure that I could. Maybe if I built a thing out of cow wool, KAO, means ceramic wool, basically like fiberglass, just made out of ceramic instead. If I had one of those and put this around, I could maybe lose less heat, maybe put a lid over the top of it and just throw it on and off. I could do that. Not sure that I will, but I'll have to give that some thought. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out in this live stream. It's been wonderful chatting with you guys. I hope that you have a wonderful evening. I have time for one more question, I guess. RakeTech. Had a bike that exact opposite. A guy came off the railroad tracks near my house and for some reason stole my very fancy bike at the time. That's terrible. Dan's Backcountry, take care. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. That reminds me, I need to make those microwave kiln. I've seen those. I want to try that. Have a good day. Thanks. Have a good one. And where's the button?